Peace be upon you, and Allah's mercy and blessings. Today's story will shake your soul. How does a woman who burned the Qur'an with pride, a nun from Denmark filled with rage, end up embracing Islam and marrying a special forces soldier from Indonesia? This is the journey of Anne Lillian, a journey from hate to hope, from darkness to peace. Let's begin. Anne Lillian stood by the window of her apartment in the heart of Copenhagen. Her blue eyes gazed out at the gray winter sky, her fingers wrapped tightly around a steaming mug of coffee. It was quiet outside, too quiet for someone who carried a storm within. On the table beside her lay her phone, screen still lit up with the photos she had posted the night before. The images were clear, and, dressed in her nun's robe, standing defiantly before a fire, holding a burning Qur'an. The comments were exploding, some with praise, others with outrage. But Anne didn't care. She had made her point. Or so she thought. For years, Anne had convinced herself that Islam was the enemy. Every headline, every news report, every terrorist act she had seen had etched hatred deeper into her heart. She saw herself not just as a nun, but as a warrior of faith, defending Christianity against what she believed was a growing threat. Burning the Qur'an, to her, wasn't about cruelty. It was protest. It was her way of saying, "We will not bow." But that morning, something was different. The fire of her anger was cooling, and something else was creeping in. Doubt. For the first time in years, she stared at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back. Her eyes seemed colder. Her spirit felt tired. What was she really fighting for? The next day, as snow began to fall gently over the rooftops, Anne booked a one-way flight to Surabaya, Indonesia. Her plan was simple, yet radical. She would go to the largest Muslim country on earth, and make a statement so bold, so offensive, that the world would have no choice but to watch. She packed little. Just her robes, a small camera, and 3 copies of the Qur'an, each one she intended to burn in public. As the plane took off, Anne stared out the window. Below her, Europe disappeared beneath the clouds. Ahead of her, the unknown awaited. Surabaya was hot. Humid. Loud. A far cry from the frozen calm of Denmark. The call to prayer echoed through the city as she stepped out of the airport, a taxi waiting with her name. She had already scouted a location. A busy street corner near a mosque. She didn't expect to be welcomed. In fact, she expected backlash. But that was the point. To provoke. To disrupt. What she didn't expect was him. As she stood near the mosque's gate, about to reach for the Qur'an in her bag, a man approached, tall, broad-shouldered, calm as the morning sea. He wore a modest shirt, and had a firmness in his voice that was neither aggressive nor fearful. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Are you Anne Lillian?" And blinked. "Who wants to know?" "My name is Captain Smith," he replied. "I'm with Kopassus. But I'm not here to arrest you. I just want to talk." She froze. Kopassus? Indonesia's special forces? Why would one of them be here? "I don't debate," she snapped. "And I don't answer to Muslims." Smith didn't flinch. He smiled, calm, composed, almost amused. "Even if I only ask questions you've never heard before?" he said. And hesitated. "I came here to make a statement," she said defiantly. "To show that Islam isn't above criticism. You want to stop me? I want to understand you," Smith replied, his voice low and steady. "And maybe you'll understand something too." They walked to a nearby bench. Crowds passed by, unaware of the battle beginning, not of fists or flames, but of minds and souls. And started the conversation with fire. She spoke of terrorism, oppression of women, of Christian persecution. Smith listened, quiet, focused, unbothered. When she paused, he asked only one thing. "Have you read the Qur'an cover to cover, Anne?" "No," she admitted. Smith nodded. "Then how can you burn a book you've never read?" And scoffed. "I've seen what people do in its name. Isn't that enough? People have done evil in every name," Smith said gently. Even in the name of Jesus, peace be upon him. Should we burn the Bible too? Silence. And had no answer. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel in control. That evening, Rahmath offered her a copy of the Qur'an. Take it, he said. No tricks. No preaching. Just read it, with the same courage you used to burn it. She took it, not because she was convinced, but because she was curious. Rahmath didn't look like a fanatic. He didn't speak like a threat. He spoke like a man of peace. Back at her hotel, and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the book in her lap. Her hands trembled as she opened to the first page. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Those words stopped her. She expected anger, fury, war. But what she found was mercy. She kept reading. And as the night wore on, the fire within her slowly began to flicker, not with rage, but with wonder. The sun rose slowly over Surabaya, casting a soft, golden hue across the rooftops. And Lillian hadn't slept. The Qur'an Rahmath had given her lay open beside her on the hotel bed. Pages were marked. Words circled. She had meant to skim, just enough to mock it later. But now, every time she tried to close the book, something pulled her back. She didn't want to admit it. But something inside her was unraveling. Her eyes burned from reading. Her mind, once fortified with years of dogma and distrust, felt strangely soft, vulnerable, almost. By mid-morning, and found herself walking toward the mosque again. She didn't know why. Maybe she hoped Rahmath would be there. Maybe she needed answers to the questions now echoing inside her, questions she never thought she'd ask. And there he was. Standing near the entrance, speaking to an elderly man in Javanese. Rahmath caught her from the corner of his eye and smiled. You came back, he said, almost like he already knew she would. And approached slowly, the Qur'an clutched in her hands like it was something dangerous, but also something she didn't want to let go of. I read it, she muttered, avoiding his gaze. All of it? He asked. Not yet, she admitted. But enough to know it's not what I thought. Rahmath nodded. That's all it takes. A little honesty. A little openness. And looked around. People moved in and out of the mosque, some glancing at her curiously, but not a single face showed anger. She had expected shouts, condemnation, maybe even violence. Instead, she was greeted with peace. And that confused her more than anything. They sat again, this time inside the mosque's courtyard, near a small fountain. And leaned forward, her voice tight. Why didn't you stop me that day? You knew what I came here to do. Rahmath folded his hands on his lap. Because Allah guides whom He wills. My job is to show you what I know, not to fight you. And what do you know? She challenged. He looked at her gently. That most hatred is born from misunderstanding. And most fear from ignorance. She swallowed hard. It was as if he could see through her, past her anger, past her carefully built walls, into the tiny aching place she never let anyone see. I was raised to believe Islam was violent. That it was oppressive. That Muslims wanted to take over the world. And said, almost whispering. And I believed it because I never questioned it. Rahmath nodded slowly. And now? She sighed. Now I don't know what to believe. Rahmath smiled, not in mockery, but in understanding. That's where truth begins. The days passed, and Anne kept returning to the mosque. Each visit chipped away at the certainty she once clung to. She spoke with women in hijabs who laughed, studied, worked. She watched children recite Quranic verses with joy. She listened to sermons that spoke not of war, but of patience, of humility, of love for one's neighbor. She was still angry. But not at Islam. She was angry at how wrong she had been. One afternoon, as the call to prayer echoed softly in the distance, and looked at Rahmath. You said something the other day, that our struggle is not about hatred, but about building peace. He nodded. She hesitated. How do you build peace, when all you've ever known is war? Rahmath looked up at the sky. You start by surrendering. Not to people, but to truth. That night, alone in her hotel room, and stood in front of the mirror. She stared at her reflection, the same face, the same robe, but a different soul. Tears welled up in her eyes. She had spent years raging against something she never understood. She had burned books that preached mercy. She had insulted people she never knew. And yet, those very people were now the ones showing her compassion. She fell to her knees. Not out of defeat, but out of exhaustion. Her heart was tired of hate. The next morning, she asked Rahmat to meet her again. They sat under a tree behind the mosque, the breeze rustling the leaves overhead. I'm not ready to convert, she said, her voice shaking. But I want to keep learning. I need to. Rahmat smiled softly. There's no rush, and guidance is not a race. I don't know if I'll ever be accepted back home, she added. They'll think I've lost my mind. Rahmat looked at her, serious now. The world may reject you for walking toward the truth, but Allah will never abandon you for it. Those words hit her like a tidal wave. Because deep down, and wasn't just afraid of changing. She was afraid of being alone in it. But Rahmat's words lit a quiet fire in her chest. One not of destruction, but of faith. That evening, and walked back to her hotel with a strange calm in her heart. For the first time, she felt free from the weight of pretending. She didn't have to fake her certainty. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She just needed time and truth. She pulled out the Qur'an again and began to read. This time not as an enemy, but as a seeker. And Lillian had never felt lighter. But with that lightness came an unfamiliar weight, fear. Not fear of Islam anymore, no. That fear had melted away slowly over the past days. Her heart no longer recoiled at the word Muslim. Her ears no longer heard threat in the adhan. Instead, her fear had shifted to what would happen next. Because something in her heart had already changed. But the world she came from, the community she belonged to, had not. Back in Denmark, winter had thickened. The churches were lit with candles, families huddled for prayer, and familiar faces prepared for the quiet solemnity of Christmas. And had once loved this season. Now, it felt different, distant even. She had flown back with no announcement, carrying little but a suitcase and the Qur'an Rahmat had given her. Her heart was full. Her soul uncertain. But the silence that greeted her at home wasn't peace, it was tension. Her neighbors avoided her. Her fellow nuns barely looked her in the eye. When she walked into the chapel one morning, heads turned. Whispers followed. And then came the messages. Emails. Social media. Accusations of betrayal. Accusations of madness. How could you stand with them? You're spitting on everything we gave you. You are not one of us anymore. And sat alone in her apartment, staring at her screen, feeling her world unravel. This was the price of transformation. One evening, as she returned from the supermarket, she noticed a car parked across the street. A man stepped out, tall, stiff, and stern-faced. She recognized him instantly. He was a senior member of the church council. A man who once praised her for fighting the Islamic tide. Now he looked at her with something colder than disapproval. He looked at her with contempt. You should be ashamed, he said quietly, but firmly, and stood still. I heard what you did in Indonesia. Do you think that's freedom? Do you think Islam is peace? He stepped closer. You've betrayed us, and you'll see what that betrayal brings. She didn't reply. She didn't run. She just whispered, I've found peace. I don't regret it. He sneered, stepped back, and walked away. But his words clung to her like frost. That night, and texted Rahmat. It's harder here than I thought. I didn't expect them to hate me so much. His reply came moments later. Even the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was rejected by his own people. But he never gave up. And read that message again and again. There was something about Rahmat's calm that steadied her. As if his belief in her gave her permission to believe in herself. She took a deep breath. And she made a decision. She returned to the local mosque the next morning. Not as a visitor, but as a student. She removed her shoes, covered her hair with a soft scarf, and stepped inside. The air was fragrant with oud. The prayer rugs stretched across the hall like an endless sea. Inside, no one judged her. No one knew her history. They saw only what she had become, a seeker. An elderly woman approached, smiling, and helped her adjust her hijab. Another offered her tea. The warmth melted something frozen inside her. It was the first time in weeks she felt welcome. Days turned into weeks. She spent her mornings studying, her evenings praying. And the Qur'an, once a target of her rage, had become her anchor. Then, one Friday afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the call to prayer echoed through the minaret, and approached the imam. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were clear. "I'm ready," she said. He nodded gently. "Then let us bear witness." In a small, quiet room within the mosque, and stood before a group of women and the imam. She repeated the words slowly, carefully, every syllable washing over her like rain. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. And I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." Silence followed. Then tears. From her. From others. From strangers who now felt like family. Her name was now Amina. But and still remained within her, only softened, changed, awakened. She texted Rahmat later that night. "I said the Shahida today?" His reply came instantly. "Alhamdulillah. I'm proud of you, Anne. Or should I say, Amina?" She smiled. For the first time in years, her smile reached her eyes. But Rahmat's next message made her heart beat faster. "When are you coming back?" She paused. Typed. Erased. Typed again. "Soon. I think. I need to see you again." A week later, and boarded a plane back to Surabaya. This time, not as a protester. Not as a stranger. But as someone chasing a feeling that had started in the courtyard of a mosque, with a calm voice, a copy of the Qur'an, and a man who never argued, just listened. When she landed, Rahmat was there, waiting. Their eyes met. And everything made sense. The Surabaya heat hit, and like a wave, but this time, it wasn't hostile. It felt like a warm embrace. Like the city remembered her. Like it had been waiting. Rahmat stood at the arrival's gate, tall in his uniform, eyes shining with the kind of pride that didn't need words. And walked toward him, scarf draped neatly over her hair, a soft beige tunic replacing her old black robe. She was no longer the angry nun who once came here to burn the Qur'an. She was a new woman. "Amina," he said, using her new name for the first time. Her heart fluttered. "Welcome back." That night, they walked along the quiet courtyard of the mosque where their story had begun. The same old fountain trickled in the corner. The same wind rustled the trees overhead. But everything had changed. They sat on the same bench where Rahmat had first asked her, "Why do you hate what you don't understand?" Now, he asked gently, "Do you still feel like you're walking alone?" And shook her head. "No. Not anymore. But I do feel like I'm walking between two worlds." Rahmat nodded. "That never fully goes away. But sometimes the bridge between worlds is stronger than either side." She looked at him. "Are you that bridge?" He smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe we build it together." Over the next few weeks, and now Amina settled into her rhythm. She stayed with a Muslim family near the mosque. The daughters treated her like an older sister, giggling as they helped her tie her hijab and taught her Indonesian phrases. She began volunteering at the mosque library, organizing books and learning Hadith. Every now and then, women would come up to her and ask, "Are you the one from Denmark?" She'd nod. And they'd hug her without hesitation. But not every memory had faded. At night she still dreamed of Denmark. Of the chapel's stained glass windows. Of voices whispering traitor. Of old friends who now refused to return her calls. Some wounds don't bleed. They echo. One evening, Rahmat invited her to speak at a women's interfaith event hosted by a local university. She hesitated at first. What if I say the wrong thing? Rahmat placed a comforting hand over hers. Tell the truth. That's never wrong. So she did. That night, in a room full of women from all walks of life, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, and stood and spoke. I used to burn Qur'ans, she said quietly. And now I carry one in my heart. Gasps rippled through the room. But Anne didn't flinch. I was raised to hate what I didn't know. I burned what I didn't read. I judged what I never understood. But Islam didn't respond with hate. It responded with kindness. With patience. With rahmat. She smiled, eyes misting. Both the concept and the man. The room erupted in applause. Afterward, a young Christian woman approached her. I've never heard someone speak like that, she whispered. It gives me hope. Hope. That was something Anne thought she'd lost. But here it was, blooming again. Days passed. Ramadan approached. And decided to fast for the first time. She struggled, of course. The hunger. The headaches. The early sahur and long hours. But every hardship brought a strange sweetness. A reminder of her inner strength. A reminder of purpose. Rahmat, seeing her devotion, brought her dates and water each evening. They would sit beneath the mosque's archways and break their fast together, quietly thanking Allah for each other's presence. Then one night, after terawih prayers, Rahmat took her for a walk near the old harbor. The moon shimmered over the water. Amina, he said, his tone different now. Slower. Deeper. She turned to him. I don't want to just walk beside you in this world. I want to walk with you, through all of it. The good. The hard. The unknown. He took a breath. Will you marry me? Silence. Only the waves answered at first. Then, a soft laugh. A tear rolling down her cheek. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Rahmat. I will. He didn't smile right away. He just looked at her like she was a prayer answered. The mosque courtyard was decorated with soft lanterns the night of their nikah. It wasn't a grand wedding. It was a sincere one. Close friends. The local imam. The family who had hosted Anne. She wore a cream-colored gown, modest but elegant, with a white hijab that framed her radiant face. Her hands trembled as she signed the marriage contract, but her heart was still. Rahmat, in a simple white robe, looked at her like she was the sunrise. When they recited the du'a together, everyone in the room felt it. This wasn't just a marriage. It was a transformation. From enemies to allies. From strangers to soulmates. From anger to love. Their honeymoon wasn't in a luxury resort. It was a quiet trip through central Java, visiting Islamic boarding schools, helping with charity events, and sharing their story when invited. Everywhere they went, people were moved, not just by the story of Anne's conversion, but by the way she and Rahmat looked at each other. Like they had both found home in the same heart. One elderly woman in Yogyakarta pulled Anne aside and said, Your past is heavy, child. But your future, it's light. And you're glowing in it. And cried that night, not from sadness, but from healing. But even in joy, trials followed. When news of her marriage reached Denmark, the backlash returned. Articles titled, Nun turned Muslim marries Indonesian soldier. Flooded tabloids. Online hate resurfaced. She was called a traitor, an attention seeker, even mentally unstable. One day, a package arrived in Surabaya addressed to her. Inside was a burned Bible and a note. Let's see if your new friends like this. And held it in shaking hands. Rahmat read the note, his jaw tightening. But then, he looked at her. Do you regret any of it? He asked quietly. She looked up, her voice calm. No. Not a second. They reported the threat, but more importantly, they decided to do more. They would no longer just live peacefully. They would teach peace. Together. And Lillian, now known as Amina Rahmat, sat in the quiet study of their Surabaya home, sunlight streaming through sheer white curtains. On the table before her lay 2 books. One was a Bible, scorched and torn. The other, a Qur'an, soft leather-bound, pages well-worn, corners bookmarked with tiny notes. She picked them both up, and placed them side by side. Not in conflict, but in memory. The threats from Europe hadn't stopped. Angry letters. Hate-filled emails. A firebomb attempt at the community mosque where she volunteered. But Amina no longer flinched. She had learned something extraordinary since marrying Rahmat. Peace doesn't mean safety. It means courage in the face of hatred. It means holding your ground when the world tries to pull you back into rage. Rahmat stood by her in every storm. Calm, steady, never once asking her to hide or run. And now, they were building something much bigger than themselves. The 2 of them launched a project called The Bridge of Hearts. It began with simple seminars, open conversations between Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and even atheists, spaces to share stories without judgment. Then it grew. Their home became a hub for peace workers from around the world. Amina spoke at interfaith conferences. Not with slides and statistics, but with her soul. With her story. How she once burned Qur'ans, and now taught them. "I don't speak to convert anyone," she'd always say. "I speak so no one ever burns what they don't understand." One of her speeches went viral. Translated into 17 languages. Played on national TV in Indonesia, Denmark, and even Jordan. The night air in Istanbul was crisp. In the garden of the Bridge of Hearts International Center, soft lights twinkled above long tables where guests from every continent sat, scholars, students, peace activists, mothers with children in their laps. Laughter mixed with the fragrance of jasmine tea and oud. At the head of the gathering sat Amina Rahmat, once known to the world as Lilian, the nun who burned the Qur'an. But no one here remembered her that way anymore. They remembered her for something far greater. A voice came over the speakers. "Tonight, we honor the founders of a movement that began not with power, but with forgiveness." Applause rose as Rahmat stepped forward with their young daughter in his arms, Miriam, now 3, with honey-brown eyes and a scarf tied gently over her tiny head by her mama earlier that evening. Amina stood next to him, her hijab white, her gown modest but glowing under the garden lights. Rahmat began, voice deep but emotional. 5 years ago, this woman stood before a mosque ready to burn its holy book. Today, she teaches it to children in 3 languages. Allah can turn any story into a sign. Tears welled in Amina's eyes, but she stood tall. "When I first came to Islam, I thought I was walking away from my identity. I didn't know I was walking into my soul. I didn't know the people I feared would become my family. I didn't know the man I argued with would become my husband." The crowd smiled. Some laughed. Some cried. She continued, "This project isn't just ours. It's yours. It belongs to every child who asks why do they hate us. Every convert who whispers Shahida in fear. Every mother who wants to raise her child without hate. And every soul, of every religion, who wants to understand before they judge." Her daughter tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, when is the story part?" Amina knelt, kissed her forehead. "Now, Habibti." She picked up a book, her first children's storybook. "The day I found the light inside a book I tried to burn." She began to read aloud under the stars, as children gathered around her feet. Rahmat watched from a distance, his heart full. This wasn't just the story of a nun who converted to Islam. This was the story of what happens when hate meets patience, when fire meets mercy, and when one woman's fall becomes an ummah's rise. Surabaya, the heart of East Java's bustling trade network, is where this extraordinary journey began. Amidst the screeching forklifts and shouting foremen of a massive logistics warehouse, fate crossed the paths of 2 people from opposite worlds. One was Sareth San, a refined American businesswoman known for her sharp mind and sharper blue eyes. The other was Bayu, a humble, dust-covered truck driver from Malang, used to the heat of the road and the rhythm of heavy tires on asphalt. Sarah had arrived in Indonesia to expand her export-import empire. With success in several countries and fluent in the language of contracts, profits, and deadlines, she wore her tailored navy blue blazer like armor. She walked with the calm confidence of someone who had seen boardrooms in Singapore, Frankfurt, and New York. This day, she was simply here for a routine inspection, yet destiny had other plans. Bayu was working nearby, helping arrange containers. His shirt was stained with oil, hands rough from years of hard labor. He barely noticed Sarah at first. When their eyes met, he offered a polite nod, the same gesture he'd give to any visitor. To him, she was just another boss from another world. But for Sarah, something shifted. She had met hundreds of men in suits, fluent in flattery and greed. But Bayu's simplicity caught her off guard. There was sincerity in the way he moved, a quiet dedication in how he helped others without being told. He didn't speak much, didn't try to impress, and yet he left an impression that lingered in her mind long after she returned to her hotel suite that night. The next meeting came unexpectedly. A few days later, Bayu's truck broke down outside the same warehouse. As he waited for repairs, sitting on the back of the vehicle with a half-eaten sandwich in hand, Sarah arrived again for a final inspection. This time, she paused. Instead of heading straight inside, her eyes locked on the solitary man beside the truck. Something in her hesitated. She approached him, not as a businesswoman looking to question logistics, but as a human curious about another's world. "Truck trouble?" she asked, her Bahasa Indonesia precise but soft. Bayu looked up, surprised. "Yeah, belt snapped. Should be fixed in an hour." There was an awkward silence, but it wasn't unpleasant. Sarah found herself asking questions, about life on the road, about the long nights and silent highways. And Bayu, though modest, answered openly. He told her about his hometown in Malang, his mother who still waited up late when he was on the road, the simple meals he loved, and the joy of seeing familiar faces at rest stops. For Sarah, who had always lived out of airports and luxury hotels, this world was foreign, but it wasn't repulsive. It was calming, grounding, real. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself more aware of her surroundings. She watched how her employees paused during midday to pray, how they greeted each other with "Assalamu alaikum," and always started meetings with Bismillah. Islam had always been something Sarah saw from a distance, a backdrop to her travels in Muslim countries. But now, it was slowly stepping into the foreground of her life. Especially because of Bayu. She never saw him preach. Never saw him try to impress anyone with piety. But she noticed how he quietly left for prayer, even in the middle of a busy delivery schedule. How he thanked God before every meal, even if it was just rice and tofu in a roadside stall. His faith wasn't loud, it was lived. When Sarah's business brought her to Yogyakarta, something compelled her to explore more. There, among the serenity of old palaces and poetic sunsets, she visited the Kauman Grand Mosque. Initially, it was just to admire the architecture. But sitting on the cool marble floor, watching people bow in prayer, she felt a peace that surprised her. It was like the chaos of her corporate life had been muted by a single, unseen force. Back in Jakarta, she couldn't forget that feeling. She found herself reading a translated copy of the Qur'an in her hotel room. She reached out to a local ustaz she met in Yogyakarta, asking him questions, not just about rituals, but about meaning. Submission to one God. Purpose. Gratitude. She felt something beginning to take root. Meanwhile, Bayu remained unaware of how deeply he had impacted her. To him, Sarah was still a world apart, a woman of class and connections, who would soon return to skyscrapers and stock portfolios. He respected her, but he didn't allow himself to imagine anything more. Love, after all, was something he had little time or hope for. But things changed. Sarah's interest in Islam deepened. So did her admiration for Bayu, not as a fantasy, but as a reflection of a life she had never considered before. A life that wasn't about achievement, but about contentment. And in the quiet folds of her heart, something tender began to grow. Yet with this new journey came conflict. Her family in America, devout Christians, began noticing her silence. Sarah avoided video calls. Her emails became shorter. They had no idea she was frequenting mosques, asking questions about faith, and silently comparing her old life to the simplicity she found on Java's dusty roads. The pressure grew heavier. Her colleagues noticed she had become distant from meetings. She no longer dressed as sharply. She smiled more, but spoke less. One of her closest business partners confronted her during a coffee meeting in Jakarta. "Are you all right, Sarah? You seem different." She just smiled. "Maybe I'm finally becoming myself." Jakarta buzzed like always, horns blaring, neon lights flickering over packed highways, tall towers gleaming against the tropical sky. But inside her penthouse suite, Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor with the Qur'an open in front of her. The gentle hum of the city outside contrasted sharply with the stillness in her heart. She traced her finger along the English translation, pausing at every verse that spoke of patience, truth, and trust in Allah's plan. The more she read, the more she felt her soul calming, like a wave crashing onto shore, then retreating in peace. But peace came with pressure. That same week, her mother called from Boston. "Honey, you've been distant," she said, concern dripping from every word. "You haven't visited in months, and your last email felt strange." Sarah hesitated. "I'm okay, Mom. Just thinking a lot. About life. About purpose." There was silence on the other end. Then came the dreaded question. "Sarah, you're not thinking of becoming one of them, are you?" The air in the room thickened. Sarah's fingers gripped the phone tighter. "I'm just exploring, Mom. Trying to understand things better. You're a Christian, Sarah. Your father would have been devastated. Please don't do something you'll regret." She ended the call soon after, her heart aching, not because her mother scolded her, but because deep down, Sarah wasn't confused anymore. She knew what she wanted. She had just been too afraid to say it out loud. That night she texted Bayu. "Are you in Jakarta?" He replied within minutes. "Just arrived for a delivery. Tomorrow morning near the Eastern Warehouse." The next day, she met him. He stood by his truck, arms crossed, sweat on his brow, looking surprised but happy to see her. Sarah was dressed modestly now, a light scarf over her shoulders, her designer heels traded for comfortable flats. "You came," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I needed to talk to someone honest," she said quietly. "And you're the most honest person I've met in this country." They sat on the back edge of the truck, watching workers go about their day. Sarah shared everything, her doubts, her guilt, her spiritual awakening, and the backlash from her family and colleagues. Bayu listened quietly, occasionally nodding. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer quick solutions. He just sat there, letting her speak. Then, gently, he said, "I'm not a scholar. I can't explain religion like your ustaz. But I know what peace feels like. If you're feeling that, maybe that's Allah guiding you." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "But everyone thinks I'm losing my mind. That I've thrown away my success." Bayu looked at her calmly. "Then maybe they've misunderstood what success really means." His words hit deep. Over the next few weeks, Sarah made her choice. One evening, in a quiet masjid in Yogyakarta where she first found calm, she whispered the Shahida with trembling lips, her heart pounding as tears streamed down her cheeks. She was now a Muslim. It wasn't a press release event. There were no cameras, no applause. Just her, the ustaz, and a few witnesses. She stood, humbled. Free. But her freedom came at a cost. Back in Jakarta, the backlash was immediate. Several of her business associates withdrew from partnerships. Clients cancelled contracts. Word spread that Sarah San had gone off the deep end, left her religion, rejected her Western roots, and aligned herself with an unknown truck driver from Java. The headlines weren't kind. From boardroom to prayer mat, the strange fall of Sarah San. The businesswoman who traded power for piety. Her inbox flooded with judgment. One message from her former investor read, "We believed in your mind. What happened to you?" Sarah sat in her apartment, watching the city lights blink like stars. But even in the face of criticism, she felt no regret. She remembered Bayou's words. Maybe they've misunderstood what success really means. Meanwhile, Bayou was battling his own storm. News of his connection with Sarah had spread in Malang. His family, simple, modest, and unaccustomed to media attention, felt overwhelmed. His mother worried aloud at dinner. What if she leaves you one day? What if this is just a phase for her? Even his neighbors questioned the relationship. A foreigner, a businesswoman, she doesn't belong in our world, Bayou, one of them said. Don't let your heart blind you. Bayou, torn between his feelings and his family's concerns, found himself walking long stretches of road just to think. He didn't blame anyone. Sarah was, after all, someone completely different. But he also knew her sincerity. He had seen it not in her words, but in her actions. The way she left everything, the way she showed up at his side during his accident, the way she embraced a life she never imagined. He finally spoke to his mother. She chose this path not because of me. Islam came to her heart before I ever said anything. And I love her, Ma. Not for her background, but for her bravery. His mother sighed, her eyes welling. Then bring her here. Let us see what you see. And so, on a quiet Sunday morning, Bayou brought Sarah to Malang. She wore a long, simple dress and a light cream hijab. No makeup. No jewelry. Just her sincere smile and nervous eyes. At first, the house was quiet. His mother watched her cautiously. But then, Sarah stepped forward, greeted her with, Assalamu alaikum, and knelt down to help cut vegetables for lunch without being asked. Bayou's mother couldn't help but smile. It wasn't long before the awkwardness faded. By afternoon, Sarah was sitting with the neighborhood women, learning how to fold banana leaves for snacks. Children gathered around her, curious about her accent. She laughed easily, even when she stumbled over words. And in Bayou's eyes, this was the most beautiful she had ever been. Later that evening, as they sat under the mango tree in the backyard, Bayou turned to her. You've changed everything in my life, he said softly. Sarah smiled. You showed me that I didn't need everything to be happy. The decision was made quietly, without fanfare or planning boards, just two hearts agreeing that they no longer needed permission from the world to be happy. Sarah and Bayou decided to marry. Not in a five-star hotel. Not with designer gowns and sparkling chandeliers. No diplomats, no CEOs, no journalists. Just a small gathering in Bayou's family home in Malang, surrounded by neighbors, friends, and the fragrance of home-cooked rice and fried tempeh. The wedding day dawned gently, with the early call to prayer echoing through the quiet village. Sarah awoke on a thin cotton mattress on the floor, sunlight casting soft beams through wooden shutters. A borrowed mirror leaned against the wall, and in it, she caught her reflection, no makeup, just a woman in a white hijab, her blue eyes calm. Bayou wore a crisp white baju koko, hands trembling as he rehearsed his vows. He wasn't nervous because of the marriage. He was nervous because he still couldn't believe it was real. Outside, neighbors helped arrange plastic chairs in the yard. The walls were decorated with plain cloth and strings of flowers. There was no glitz, only sincerity. When the ijab kabul was pronounced, Bayou's voice cracked slightly, but his words were clear. Sarah's heart swelled. She didn't cry, but her soul did. That moment, sitting beside Bayou, holding hands in front of people who had once doubted them, was the culmination of everything she had left behind, and everything she had finally found. After the guests offered their congratulations, an old woman approached Sarah and pressed a warm hand on her cheek. You're one of us now, she whispered in Javanese. Sarah smiled. I feel like I've always been. Life after marriage didn't become easier. In fact, it brought new challenges. Bayou's modest house in Malang became their home. There was no air conditioning, no marble countertops. The kitchen was small, the bed creaked when they turned, and the nights were filled with sounds of roosters, motorbikes, and the distant hum of prayer calls. But Sarah never once complained. She learned to wash clothes by hand. She memorized how much chili Bayu liked in his sambal. She joined his mother at the market, carrying vegetables in a basket and bargaining like a local. Slowly, the villagers stopped calling her the foreigner. She was just Sarah, Bayu's wife. Bayu, too, changed. He started reading books. Not many, but enough to surprise the people around him. He wanted to understand Sarah's old world, her knowledge, her business sense. She encouraged him to think bigger, but never to abandon his roots. He remained a truck driver, but now he drove with more purpose, knowing that someone waited for him with love, not just a plate of food. One day, Bayu came home with an idea. "Come with me," he said, holding up a pair of gloves. Sarah frowned. "Where?" "On the road. A real trip. Let me show you my world." The next morning, they packed a small bag and set out in Bayu's truck, heading east. Their destination? No one in particular. Just the Java highway stretching endlessly ahead. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, hair tucked into her scarf, eyes wide with wonder. She had flown over this island many times, but now, on the ground, everything looked different. The rice paddies shimmered. The roadside stalls buzzed with life. Every curve of the road felt like a story waiting to be told. They stopped often, sometimes for tea, sometimes just to pray by a riverbank. Bayu taught her how to read the clouds for rain. Sarah taught him how to log expenses on a phone app. They laughed when the truck broke down, and cried when they saw a barefoot child sleeping in a rest stop alone. These days on the road were hard. No hotels, no showers, just dusty cabins and worn-out rest areas. But they were also the most joyful. They learned each other's rhythm. When Sarah got carsick, Bayu would drive slower. When Bayu grew quiet, Sarah would hum softly beside him. One night, parked beside a cliff near Baniwangi, they sat on the roof of the truck. Below them, the sea crashed in steady waves. Bayu broke the silence. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Sarah didn't answer right away. The stars above were too mesmerizing. "I miss some comforts, sure. But I don't miss the emptiness. I used to have a calendar full of meetings but a heart full of silence." Bayu looked at her. "And now?" She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Now I don't know where we'll sleep tomorrow, but I go to bed with peace." That moment, under the stars, was the beginning of something new. They didn't just love each other, they had become each other's home. News of their travels began to spread online. A few bloggers shared photos of Sarah helping Bayu wash the truck at a roadside stop. Some netizens mocked her. Others were inspired. One viral post read, "An American millionaire gave up luxury to live in a truck across Java. Not because she failed, but because she found love." But with attention came tension. One evening, after a long drive, Bayu checked his phone and froze. A major online news outlet had published an article titled, "Runaway Heiress Marries Indonesian Truck Driver, a Real-Life Soap Opera?" The comments were brutal. Accusations flew, calling Sarah a fraud, a woman in crisis, someone who would eventually leave Bayu and return to her real life. Bayu was furious. Sarah, however, remained calm. "They don't know our story," she said. "And we don't owe it to them." Bayu shook his head. "But I hate that they think you're pretending. That you're just playing poor." She took his hand. "Then let's show them. Not with words, but with life. One day at a time." And that's exactly what they did. They kept driving. Kept living. Kept loving. With every sunrise over the paddy fields, and every cup of tea shared with roadside strangers, they proved that true love doesn't need to shout. It just needs to endure. Their journey continued, one town to the next, one cargo load at a time. Java stretched wide before them, an island pulsing with life, markets bursting with laughter, children chasing kites, women stirring boiling pots in roadside stalls. Sarah captured these moments in a little leather notebook, one Bayu had gifted her after their first week on the road. On one page she had written, "I used to think I was powerful when I stood at the top of a company. Now I realize real strength is choosing a life where you have less but feel more. But love, even the kind built on sincerity, faces trials. One humid morning in central Java, Bayu received a call that made his face pale. His father, who had remained silent and distant since Bayu's marriage, had collapsed. A stroke. Bayu dropped everything and drove through the night with Sarah by his side, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When they arrived, the house was filled with whispers and sideways glances. Bayu's extended family, uncles, cousins, neighbors, stood clustered in corners. Some didn't acknowledge Sarah at all. Others offered forced smiles. Sarah, as always, handled it with grace. She sat on the edge of the mat where Bayu's mother wept softly, and without a word, began preparing hot tea for the guests. She peeled fruit, folded laundry, and swept the courtyard. She didn't try to prove herself. She just served. That evening, one of Bayu's cousins cornered him outside. "You love her. We see that. But can you really give her what she left behind? She was a woman of the world, Bayu. And you're just a driver." Bayu clenched his jaw. "I'm her husband. That's enough." Inside, Sarah overheard the tail end of the conversation. She didn't interrupt. She didn't cry. She just walked quietly to the guest room, closed the door, and prayed. Not for herself. For strength. In the days that followed, Bayu's father slowly recovered. And surprisingly, it was Sarah who cracked the hardened shell of the old man. One night, while Sarah was reading the Qur'an aloud in the living room, Bayu's father, watching from his bed, asked her to come closer. "You speak Arabic better than me," he joked, his voice still weak. Sarah smiled shyly. "Only learning. Still slow." He nodded. "But sincere. And that is more important." From that moment, a bridge formed. Small gestures led to big changes. And soon, Bayu's entire family saw in Sarah what Bayu had always seen, kindness that didn't need to be loud. But just as peace began to blossom in one corner of their lives, a storm brewed in another. One day, while resting at a truck stop outside Solo, Sarah opened her email to find an offer that pulled her breath away. A multinational corporation based in Singapore had heard about her story. They wanted her to return, not just return, but lead a global initiative promoting ethical supply chains in Southeast Asia. The salary was staggering. The prestige even more so. They were offering her everything she had once dreamed of. She stared at the email for a long time, her tea going cold beside her. Bayu found her like that, hunched over the screen, eyebrows furrowed. "What is it?" he asked gently. She turned the laptop toward him. He read it, paused, and looked up. "And what do you want to do?" She hesitated. "I don't know." Bayu nodded slowly. "Whatever your heart says, I'll support it." But that night, when Bayu fell asleep beside her, Sarah stayed awake, staring at the ceiling of their truck cabin. Was this a test? She loved her life with Bayu. The simplicity. The sincerity. The honesty in their every interaction. But the idea of using her skills for something meaningful, to help workers across Asia, to bring change from the inside, it stirred something inside her too. Could she do both? She prayed. Then wrote a letter. The next day, she replied to the email. "Thank you for this offer. I accept, with one condition. I will not leave Indonesia. I will work remotely part-time. My priority remains my family, my husband, and my new life. If this is acceptable, I would be honored to contribute." A week later they agreed. Sarah returned to the business world, but on her own terms. Her days were now split, 3 days on the road with Bayu, 2 days working from home or a quiet internet cafe, consulting companies on ethical trade practices. She wore a hijab during her Zoom meetings, unafraid of judgment. Her past and present had finally stopped fighting. They had found a way to coexist. Still, not everyone understood. Her name began popping up in business blogs again. From Harvard MBA to Islamic modesty, the unusual journey of Sarah San. She could have been CEO. She chose simplicity. But she no longer cared. What mattered was that Bayu believed in her. That her mother-in-law smiled more now. That village children ran to greet her when she stepped off the truck. That she was now mentoring young women in rural Java who wanted to start small businesses of their own. The success she had chased for years was now happening, but not with suits or skyscrapers. It was happening in silence. In service. In sujud. And Bayu? He beamed with pride every time someone called her Abi Sarah. He never tried to make her small. He never felt threatened by her ambition. He held her hand at every turn, reminding her that she could be both soft and strong, both devout and driven. One night they stood on the edge of a cliff near Pasiton, looking out at the stars, the ocean black and endless before them. Sarah whispered, "Do you think we'll always be like this? Between two worlds?" Bayu took a deep breath. "No. One day, the world will adjust to us." The years passed gently. The truck, once loud and bumpy, now felt like a second home. Its worn seats carried not just cargo, but countless shared moments, laughter over spilled coffee, quiet prayers at sunrise, and miles of conversations that stitched their souls closer with every turn of the wheels. Sarah and Bayu had found rhythm in the unusual. 3 days a week, they journeyed across Java, delivering rice, furniture, machinery, whatever the job demanded. The other days, Sarah sat in a small room-turned office at their home in Malang, managing ethical sourcing projects for Southeast Asian companies. What once had been a dramatic departure from her life in Boston now felt like destiny. Her old colleagues had stopped calling. The Western media's curiosity faded. But Sarah didn't miss any of it. What she did miss, at least sometimes, was her family. It had been nearly 4 years since she last saw them. Their conversations had dwindled into rare, polite emails, mostly around birthdays and holidays. Her mother had never come to terms with Sarah's conversion. Her younger brother, a tech entrepreneur in New York, once called her a romantic fool for giving everything up for a truck driver in Indonesia. But Sarah no longer felt the need to defend her life. One morning, as she prepared breakfast, slicing mangoes and toasting leftover bread, Bayu walked in with a spark in his eyes. "I have something to show you," he said. He handed her a wrinkled envelope with a Boston postmark. Sarah froze. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a short letter. From her mother. "Sarah, we don't understand all of your choices, but time has shown us something we can't ignore, your peace. I see it in the photos you send, in the way you write, in your eyes. Maybe I was wrong to push you away. If you're willing, I'd like to visit. Love, Mom." Tears blurred Sarah's vision. That evening, under a canopy of stars and humming crickets, she sat beside Bayu in their backyard. "She wants to come here," she whispered. Bayu wrapped an arm around her. "Then let her. Let her see what love really built." A month later, a dusty blue car pulled up to their humble home. Sarah stood at the door in a soft green hijab, her heart beating like a drum. Her mother stepped out slowly, eyes scanning the modest garden, the bamboo fence, the neighborhood kids playing cricket barefoot in the street. She looked older. Smaller. But her eyes, those same gray eyes Sarah inherited, still held fire. When their eyes met, either moved for a moment. Then, silently, Sarah walked forward, and her mother opened her arms. The embrace was long. And wordless. Over the following days, her mother watched. She watched Sarah kneel in prayer, watched how neighbors greeted her with "Assalamu alaikum," how Bayu held her hand in public, not with pride, but protection. She ate simple food, tempeh, jackfruit curry, rice with salted fish. She sat in plastic chairs during evening chats and swatted flies like the rest of them. And she saw something no news article or phone call could have explained. Her daughter wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. One night, while Sarah was folding laundry in the corner, her mother sat on the wooden bench outside with Bayu. "I didn't like you," she said honestly. "Not at first." Bayu chuckled. "You wouldn't be a good mother if you did." She smiled faintly. "But now I see it. She's free. Not the kind of free we used to talk about, not financial freedom. But spiritual freedom." Bayu nodded. Islam gave her that. I didn't. I just stood by her while she found it. She looked at him, more curious than before. And you never feel small? Standing next to her? Bayu leaned back, eyes on the sky. Every man should feel big when his wife shines. That's love. For the first time, she truly saw what Sarah had always tried to tell her. This wasn't a phase. This was her life. Her purpose. Her peace. When she finally flew back to Boston, her parting words were quiet. I may not understand everything, but I understand enough now. Years passed. Sarah and Bayu had a daughter, Safia. She was born during a rainy season, the thunder echoing through their home as Sarah held her newborn, whispering Bismillah with every breath. Safia grew up bilingual, speaking English with her mother and Javanese with her grandmother. She played with children in the village, rode on Bayu's truck from time to time, and often slept with her head in Sarah's lap while she typed reports for her clients. Sarah and Bayu taught her not with lectures, but with actions. They taught her that wealth wasn't in houses or cars, but in hearts that give and hands that serve. That true love doesn't demand attention, it just quietly survives storms and still chooses to hold on. Their story became a quiet legend. People still whispered about the American woman who married a truck driver. But no one said it with pity anymore. They said it with awe. Not because she gave up everything, but because she found everything, without needing more. Sometimes, Bayu would take Safia to the hills overlooking Malang. He'd point to the roads below, the trucks crawling along the curves, the sun setting behind the mountains. See that? He'd say. That road changed my life. Safia would nod. Because of Mama? He'd smile. Because of Allah. But yes, Mama too. And Sarah? She still wrote in her little notebook. But now, her pages were filled with gratitude. Her mornings started with far prayer, her afternoons with Bayu at the local school teaching logistics, and her evenings with Safia curled up at her side. She had traveled the world, built empires, dined with diplomats. But her real journey began the day she noticed a quiet man, covered in dust, loading crates with sincerity. It began in Surabaya. And it led her home. They say the heart doesn't ask for permission before falling. It doesn't care about passports, borders, or the baggage we carry. It simply falls. Nara Eliana stepped off the plane in Yogyakarta with sunglasses still shielding her tired eyes. The heat hit her like a soft wall, warm, unfamiliar, yet oddly soothing. She had just left Tel Aviv, but in truth, she had been trying to leave herself. Everything back home was suffocating, too many expectations, too many rules, and too little space to just breathe. She didn't plan this trip in detail. It was a spontaneous escape, but somewhere inside her, she had hoped Indonesia would offer a pause to her chaos. After 3 days in the city, the charm of the tourist spots wore off. Gudeg, batik, shopping lanes, nice but forgettable. What she wanted couldn't be photographed for Instagram. It had to be felt. You should try the village at the foot of the mountain, her hotel driver suggested. It's not on Google Maps. Very peaceful. Locals call it Karangrejo. Perfect for being alone, he added with a laugh. That morning, she sat quietly in the back seat of a rental car. Her eyes wandered over the endless green rice fields stretching across the horizon. The road became narrower with every turn. Eventually, even her phone's signal vanished. The car radio played something in a language she didn't understand. We're almost there, the driver said, pointing to a small hill dotted with banana trees. They stopped near a worn-out wooden guard post. No signs, no welcome banners, no entrance gates. Just a gravel path ahead. She stepped out, hoisted her backpack, and walked forward. The sun was kind, the wind gentle, and the scent of the earth after rain wrapped around her like an old memory. But after 20 minutes of walking alone, that peaceful silence turned into unease. She was lost. No signal. No people. No idea how to return. Just as panic began to bloom in her chest, she saw someone in the distance. A young man, walking his bike up a slope. A bundle of straw filled the basket on the back. "Excuse me. Do you speak English?" Nara called out. The young man paused, studying her face. "A little," he said softly. "You lost?" She nodded. "Yes. I was just walking, but now I don't know where I am." He gestured calmly. "Follow me." And just like that, they walked side by side through the quiet path. He didn't ask questions. She didn't know what to say. But there was a calmness to his presence, like he belonged to the land, to the trees, to the silence. When they reached his home, a humble wooden house surrounded by banana trees and garden beds, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes welcomed Nara with hot tea and fried bananas. "You can rest here," the boy told his grandmother in Javanese, then turned to Nara. "Tourists are human too," he added with a smile. Nara laughed. "Yes, but I'm not the usual kind." That night, she didn't go back to her hotel. She accepted the small guest room beside the garden, its windows opening to the sound of crickets and the rustling wind. Wrapped in a thin blanket, Nara slept more peacefully than she had in months. The young man's name was Azam. That's all he said. No last name. No details. Just Azam. The next morning began with a rooster's call instead of her usual phone alarm. She emerged from the room, hair unkempt, wearing a loose t-shirt. Azam was already awake, dressed in a long-sleeved cocoa shirt, barefoot on the porch. He looked like a part of this place. "Good morning," she greeted. "Morning. You sleep well?" "Surprisingly, yes," she smiled. They had breakfast in silence, boiled cassava, tea that wasn't too sweet. There were no clinks of spoons against plates. No rush. No urgency. Just the slow rhythm of village life. After the meal, Azam picked up his old backpack. "I go shop," he said, pausing. "You want come?" She nodded. She didn't know what kind of shop, but she was curious. As they walked the muddy path, children waved at Azam. Some parents smiled at Nara with curiosity, but no suspicion. It felt like a place where people still believed in kindness. The shop was a simple wooden stall with essentials: instant noodles, soak, fresh greens. The shopkeeper, a woman in a hijab, spoke warmly to Azam in Javanese. Azam handed Nara a bottle of tea wordlessly. "You don't talk much," she said. He smiled. "Talking not always needed." She chuckled. "You're different from any man I've met." Azam's expression didn't change, but his eyes held something deeper. "Maybe because I grow up with different values." "Where did you grow up?" He pointed to the fields. "Here, and then Islamic boarding school." Nara blinked. "Boarding school?" Azam nodded. "But religion?" "Islam." That word, Islam, should have made her defensive. It didn't. It intrigued her. There was no pushiness in his tone, no superiority. Just quiet confidence. She liked that. Later that day, they sat on bamboo benches, overlooking rice fields. The air was fresh. The sky soft. "Do you believe in fate?" Nara asked. Azam didn't look at her. "I believe people meet for a reason." Nara nodded slowly. Her heart felt unusually light. That night she stayed again. And the next. And the next. Azam never asked her where she was from. But Nara began to wonder, should she tell him? She didn't know yet, only that the world she ran from felt very far away, and the world she was in now, strangely, felt like the beginning of something. 5 days had passed. 5 quiet mornings with cassava and tea. 5 silent walks through the fields. 5 days of sharing space with a man who barely spoke, but somehow said more in silence than anyone else had with words. Nara felt settled, almost rooted. In the stillness of Karangrejo, she found something she never found in Tel Aviv: clarity. No deadlines. No debates. No expectations. Just peace. She had helped Azam pick chilies in the garden. She sat under a guava tree reading her book. Azam's grandmother even taught her how to make tempeh. She wasn't just a tourist anymore. That evening, they sat by the rice fields again. Azam brought a thermos of hot tea. Nara brought some fried bananas from the stall. Can I ask you something? Nara said, keeping her gaze on the horizon. Azam nodded without looking at her. Why haven't you ever had a girlfriend? He paused for a long second. Not everyone needs dating to understand love. Nara chuckled. You're a normal guy though, right? Azam smiled faintly. Normal. But I'm learning. Love isn't about being fast. Or loud. She glanced at him. And if you like someone, would you say it? Azam looked down at the earth beneath his feet. If I'm sure she's good for me, yes. If she's not, I'll walk away. There was a pause. A quiet one. But this silence was heavier than usual. You're too simple, Azam, she whispered. Simple isn't weakness, he said softly. It's just peace. She looked at him longer than she should have. And for the first time, Azam noticed the look. He shifted uncomfortably, but not rudely. Not with judgment. Just restraint. Because he was beginning to feel it too. The warmth. The strange flutter in his chest every time she laughed, or asked a question, or stood too close in the garden. And he was afraid of it. That night, something changed. Not in words, but in distance. They both began to realize what was quietly building between them. Something neither of them had planned. The next morning, Azam couldn't find his hat. He searched the living room, under the table, even behind the door. Then he saw Nara's small backpack in the corner. Its zipper was half open. He hesitated. He wasn't the type to snoop. But maybe the hat had fallen in. As he gently moved the bag, a plastic card slid out. An ID card. His hand froze. Nara Eliana. Nationality, Israeli. The world around him slowed. Israeli. He didn't want to be that person who judged by nationality. But the word itself carried too much weight. Too much history. Too much pain. He put the ID back silently. But his heart? It was far from silent. That afternoon, he didn't go to the fields. Instead, he sat alone in the small mosque near the rice paddies. The prayer mats were rolled up. The fan clicked slowly overhead. His mind raced. He thought of the way Nara smiled, how she helped his grandmother, how she respected his boundaries. Nothing about her felt like a threat. Nothing about her felt fake. And yet, he couldn't ignore what that card represented. He stayed in the mosque until evening, staring at the empty walls. At home, Nara felt uneasy. Azam hadn't spoken to her all day. Not even a nod. When he finally returned, he didn't make eye contact. He walked past her and shut the door to his room. Nara stood at the door, her voice barely a whisper. Azam, what's wrong? Silence. If I've done something wrong, just tell me. Azam's voice came through the door, deep and calm but sharp like a knife. You're from Israel, Nara. She froze. I found your ID. You lied. Nara stepped back, her breath caught in her throat. I didn't lie, she said. I just didn't say it. Because you knew I would react like this. Nara swallowed hard. Yes. And you were right. She sat on the porch alone that night, the village quiet, the stars blurred by her unshed tears. Inside, Azam lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His heart burned with confusion. He couldn't forget her smile. But he couldn't forget that card either. 3 days passed. They didn't speak. They sat at the same table, but didn't share the same space. Grandma noticed, of course, but said nothing. She simply watched Nara linger longer on the porch, watched Azam work later in the fields. The silence between them wasn't cold, but it was heavy. Finally, on the morning of the 4th day, Nara tried again. Azam was stepping out for the mosque, wearing his usual sarong and shirt. I'm not going to hide anymore, she said quietly. He paused, didn't turn. I'm not asking you to talk, she continued. I just want you to know. I didn't come here to lie. I came to breathe. Azam said nothing, then walked on. Later that day, he saw her hanging laundry with Grandma. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hair tied, her eyes distant but calm. It hurt him, because despite everything, he still saw the same warmth in her face. She was honest. She had always been kind. And yet, her origin had built a wall between them he wasn't sure how to climb. That afternoon, she tried again, through laughter. Burning the vegetables while cooking lunch. Azam couldn't help it. He smiled. You burned it? A little, she said, eyes hopeful. Still edible. He sat in the corner quietly. You're trying too hard. I don't want you to forgive me, she replied. I want you to understand. Azam nodded, eyes low. My country is full of mistakes, she said. But I'm not one of them. I didn't choose where I was born. I chose to be different. And you think staying here proves that? No. But it's a start. Silence. If you want me to leave, I will. But please don't send me away without knowing who I really am. Azam sighed. I need time, Nara. I can give you time. Just please don't shut the door. That evening, they shared dinner again. For the first time in days. No long conversations. No apologies. Just tofu, rice, and soft glances across the table. When Nara went to bed, she stood outside his door and whispered, Thank you for sitting with me again. From inside, Azam replied, Let's walk slowly. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, Karangrejo was alive with celebration. The village chief was hosting a feast. Tables lined the open space behind the prayer room, dishes passed from house to house, and laughter echoed under the overcast sky. Azam had been asked to help set up. Nara, sitting with grandma under the canopy, watched as children chased each other barefoot and women arranged bowls of food. For a moment, things felt normal again, until the past caught up with her. Miss Eliana! The voice rang out across the courtyard. Nara turned instinctively, but she already knew. A man in a beige safari suit approached quickly. His accent was unmistakable, Western, but tinged with Hebrew. A camera dangled from his neck. Nara's face turned pale. Finally! I've been looking for you for 2 days, the man said with a grin. Why'd you turn your phone off? The embassy's been calling like crazy. Set, please, she whispered urgently. Not here. But it was too late. You're the only Israeli tourist in this region. Of course they were worried. The word hung in the air, Israeli. Azam turned his head slowly, eyes locking onto the man, then Nara. The whispers began immediately. From every corner of the gathering, people were watching, murmuring. Nara lowered her gaze. The man chuckled and walked away, unaware of the trail of fire he just lit. Azam walked her home in silence. And now the silence wasn't peaceful. It was thick. Unforgiving. At the edge of the village, 2 older men whispered loudly enough for Azam to hear. No wonder she's different. They said she's from Israel. That night, Nara didn't come out of her room. Grandma called her for dinner. She answered with a soft, I'm not hungry. Azam sat alone at the kitchen table, his food untouched. He hated this. Hated how fast things had shifted. Hated how the villagers who once smiled at Nara now looked at her with suspicion, even fear. But he didn't know how to stop it. After dinner, he approached her room. Nara, he said through the door. This isn't your fault. But are you sure you still want to stay? The door creaked open. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen. I was ready for this, she said quietly. But I need to know one thing. What is it? Do you still believe me? Azam hesitated. The pause stung, but then he answered. If I didn't believe you, I wouldn't be standing here. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't regret staying here, she whispered. Only that I didn't tell you sooner. Azam nodded slowly. Tomorrow, I'll speak to the village head. I'll explain everything. You don't have to do that. I want to. Nara didn't respond. But this time, the silence was full of gratitude. The next morning, Azam stood in front of the village head's house holding a folder, Nara's documents, residence permit, even a letter from the cultural office. His hands trembled. Pakarti greeted him with a distant nod. Azam handed him the folder. Sir, she's not here to cause harm. She's here in peace. Pakarti sighed as he skimmed the pages. I know it's legal, Zam. But legality isn't always enough. He leaned forward. The villagers are nervous. They see the embassy getting involved. They hear Israel and they panic. You can't blame them. Azam nodded. I understand. But I ask, don't let them judge her just because of where she's from. After a long silence, Pakarti said, I won't ask her to leave, not yet. But until this calms down, she needs to stay indoors. And you're responsible for her. I understand, Azam said softly. Thank you. But the storm didn't wait. Back home, things had already changed. Neighbors no longer waved. The old woman who once shared fried bananas at the shop turned her back when she saw Nara sweeping the yard. She's not from here, someone muttered in the stall. Could be a spy. Azam said nothing. At night, Nara sat quietly in the kitchen, picking at her food. I messed everything up, didn't I? She asked. Azam didn't answer right away. Then, gently, they just need time. Do you believe that? Another pause. I'm not sure. Her face dropped, but she didn't cry. The next afternoon, Grandma returned from her women's study circle. She sat in the kitchen, removed her shawl, and drank the tea Nara had made. Let them talk, my child, she said kindly. People's hearts are narrow sometimes. But God always makes room for those who are sincere. That simple truth made Nara feel seen again. That evening, a power outage blanketed the village in darkness. She and Azam sat under the stars on the porch, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. If you were asked to make me leave, Nara asked, would you? Azam looked up at the sky. I don't know. But I know you didn't come here to run. You came to find something. I came to stay. Azam turned his head slightly, as if hearing something new in her voice. Even if you can't accept me fully, she added, I just want you to know, I didn't lie because I was ashamed. I lied because I didn't want you to push me away before I could show you who I really am. Azam nodded slowly. I never hated you, Nara. I'm just afraid. Of what? That I'll believe in you, and be wrong. I don't know if I could recover from that. She didn't cry, but her voice trembled. I'm not asking for your heart. Just your honesty. Azam didn't reply. But he didn't leave either. That night, the distance between them was smaller than it had been in days. The next day, Azam didn't come home for lunch. When he did return in the late afternoon, his hands were dirty from working at the prayer room fence. Nara offered him water. He nodded, but didn't drink. I don't know what to do anymore, she said quietly. Azam finally met her gaze. Do you mean leave? He asked. Or pretend this is normal? Neither. Then I need time. She nodded. But deep down she knew. The time he needed wasn't for healing, it was for letting go. That evening, a knock came at the door. The village head, 2 men by his side. They sat in the living room. Grandma poured tea in silence. We've had more complaints, Pakarti said carefully. Parents are worried. Children are asking questions. He looked at Nara. For the sake of peace, we're asking that you leave the village. Within 2 days. Nara nodded without emotion. How long do I have? 2 days. After they left, no one spoke. Azam shut his door and didn't come out again. Nara sat outside her room for hours, staring at the floor, waiting for a sound. A knock. A voice. But nothing came. That night, she packed in silence. And before sleeping, she placed a folded note on the living room table. Thank you for the lesson about humans. The morning mist clung low to the ground as if even the earth didn't want her to leave. Nara stood quietly outside the house, her suitcase beside her. She wore the same jacket she'd arrived in weeks ago, now dulled by dust and memory. Grandma emerged from the doorway, her old hands trembling slightly as she pulled Nara into one last embrace. "Really going now, child?" Nara smiled gently. "It's better this way, Grandma." Grandma nodded, her eyes glossy but dry. "You've done nothing wrong. Never forget that." Nara squeezed her hand. "Neither have you." A motorcycle taxi waited at the corner of the village path, its driver hesitant, avoiding eye contact. No neighbors came to say goodbye. No children waved. The world that once welcomed her with open arms now retreated behind shut doors and low whispers. From behind the curtain, Azam stood motionless. He saw her. He heard the wheels of her suitcase on the gravel. He heard the bike engine roar softly to life. But he didn't move. Not a step. Not even a whisper. Only when the sound disappeared around the bend did he finally exhale, as if holding his breath could have kept her from leaving. But it was too late. The house felt hollow. Even the wind didn't dare pass through. On the living room table, Azam found her note. "Thank you for the lesson about humans." He sat down slowly, his thumb brushing the edge of the paper again and again. Then he folded it gently and placed it under his prayer mat. He couldn't bear to throw it away. 2 months passed. Karangrajo returned to its rhythm, roosters crowing at dawn, prayer calls echoing softly at dusk. Life went on. But something inside Azam didn't. He resumed his duties at the prayer room, taught the children Qur'an again, smiled at neighbors. But a silence grew inside him, the kind not even the most beautiful verses could reach. Until one morning, a letter arrived. No return address. But he knew that handwriting. He let it sit on his bedside table for 3 days. Every night he stared at it. Every morning he left it unopened. On the 4th night he read it. "Azam, I'm fine. I moved to another country and started working again. It's hard, but I'm not alone anymore, not the way I felt in the end there. I'm not writing to ask you for anything. Not even forgiveness. I just want you to know. I was never angry. I understand your world and your struggle. I just wish the world was kinder. I'm glad I met you. I hope you find peace, even without me. Don't worry, I won't return. Nara." Azam sat in silence for hours. He didn't cry. But the tightness in his chest made it hard to breathe. He burned the letter that night, not out of hate, but because he knew that as long as he kept it, he'd keep hoping. And hope, when it can't survive, is the most painful thing of all. Nara, too, tried to move on. But every time she looked out a window, she saw rice fields. Every time she smelled boiled cassava or heard a rooster crow, something inside her ached. She had returned to Tel Aviv, but it didn't feel like home. One night, while walking alone along the Mediterranean coast, she stopped by a small mosque. Out of instinct, not religion. She sat outside, listening to the evening adhan echo through the alleyways. It reminded her of Karangrajo. Of Azam. Of a world that had once let her feel, even briefly, like she belonged. That night she made a decision. She would go back. Not to reclaim love, but to reclaim the part of herself she'd left behind. She booked a flight to Jakarta under a different identity, posing as a cultural researcher. She knew now how sensitive things could be. How deeply people guarded their traditions. She took every precaution, fake credentials, printed research, a memorized cover story in broken Indonesian. After 3 days of tracing her steps, she found Azam, standing across the street from the Islamic boarding school where he now taught. She saw him. More peaceful. More distant. He hadn't changed. But something in him looked heavier. She didn't approach. Not at first. She waited. Wrote him a letter. Slipped it to a student at the gate. It was returned unopened. Later, the head of the boarding school came to meet her. "We appreciate your courage," the elder man said gently. "But Azam has made a choice. He will marry soon. The past is no longer part of his present." She didn't cry. Just nodded. She'd prepared for this. As she turned to walk away, another woman appeared, a middle-aged woman with stern eyes. the mother of Azam's future bride. "You are a good woman," she said firmly. "But you don't belong here. Azam wants peace. Don't take that from him." "I didn't come to take," Nara replied. "I came to return what I never meant to steal." The woman said nothing. She turned and walked away. And Nara finally understood that sometimes, love isn't about winning. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go. Back in her room, Nara opened the letter she had written to Azam. She didn't read it. She just tore it, piece by piece, until all that was left was a pile of quiet goodbyes. She left the country the next day. No fanfare. No tears. Only the silence of an ending that never truly began. Azam continued his life in the village. He married Asiya, daughter of Qi Salim, as tradition and community gently urged. They had a peaceful life. Quiet. But not without shadows. On certain nights, when the wind rustled just right and the stars shone as they did the night she left, Azam would sit on the porch and look toward the path where the village met the road. As if still waiting. Not for her return. But for the courage he never found. When villagers asked why he didn't chase after her, why he let her go without even a goodbye, his answer was simple. Because sometimes love is not enough to fight the world. And it wasn't cowardice. It was surrender. To a truth deeper than romance. That love, no matter how pure, cannot bloom in a place where it is not allowed to grow. Somewhere, Nara writes in her journal by a different window, beneath a different sky. She lives among strangers again, but she has learned to smile. Because love doesn't always end in marriage. Sometimes, love ends in silence. But even then, it was love. And that is never wasted.